Everybody, and welcome to this very important town hall tonight. My name is Melanie Lawson, along with my colleague, Chauncy, and we're going to be talking tonight about Black Lives Matter, protest and progress. It's hard to believe, but it's actually been nearly 4 months since the shocking death of Houston native George Floyd. Americans watched a horrifying video, is the only way to describe it, showing a Minneapolis police officer press his knee into Floyd's neck for more than 8 minutes until Floyd stopped breathing, all while he was crying for his life. 3 other officers also took part in that deadly restraint. All were fired and charged with Floyd's death. It's launched a wave of protest against police brutality all around the country and indeed all around the world. One of the largest was here in Houston. But what has changed since then? That's the real question. We'll talk about that with our guest in just a moment.
But first, more outrage tonight in the death of another Black person at the hands of police. This time, a young EMT in Louisville, Kentucky, Breonna Taylor. She was shot to death right there inside her own apartment where she lived with her boyfriend. Police thought there were drugs inside of that apartment, but none were found. Then late yesterday, a grand jury charged one of those police officers with wanton or reckless endangerment in this case. Now get this, not because of her death, but because bullets hit the apartment next door. So many feel as though the system failed Breonna Taylor and her neighbor's walls received justice before she did. And that's why protesters in Louisville are both angry and frustrated, are as many Black people around the nation who feel like their lives just really don't matter.
And that really brings us to our conversation about where we are now in our city 4 months after the death of George Floyd. And joining us for this important discussion tonight is Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo. We're happy to have him again. Founder of the local chapter of Black Lives Matter, Ashton Woods. City Council member Carolyn Evans-Shabazz, who represents the 3rd Ward neighborhood where George Floyd grew up. And 2 of George's childhood friends, Herbert Mouton and Jonathan Veal. And Chief, I really want to begin with you. And I know you have probably paid close attention to the Breonna Taylor case, as many of us did. And as Chauncy mentioned, there is so much outrage over this decision. And it's also sparking some fear with many people saying, could this possibly happen to me in my own home? What do you say to those people who feel as though the system failed Breonna? And in the end, none of those officers are being punished. Only one is being charged right now with shooting up property, the apartment next door. What are your thoughts about that? And how would you have handled it from the beginning?
Well, unfortunately, we had our own incident involving use of deadly force and a search warrant involving a no-knock warrant in the Harding Street case. And I think that what happened in that case is that we had 4 officers shot, but we still took our investigation very seriously, and we dug deep. And as a result, we ended up finding some malfeasance, ended up to the charge of murder of one of the officers. And I think that that's one of the reasons that, you know, despite the fact we have our challenges, that sets us apart as a community, as a police department, that we hold people accountable. I think as it relates to the Breonna shooting in Louisville, we have to rethink, why are we serving a search warrant looking and under those circumstances in the hour at night? Why aren't we looking at waiting for the target or the person that we're going to search to come out of the house? It may take a little bit more time, but at the end of the day, I think that's going to force us all to rethink in law enforcement under what circumstances do we actually kick down doors. And I think that what will happen and what you're going to see as a result of the Breonna Taylor shooting and death, that tragic death, is that you're going to see police departments being a lot more thoughtful across the country as it relates to the execution of search warrants. It's not worth the risk to everyone involved, the police officers, the potential victims that are shot in the crossfire, caught in the crossfire, including people next door, which is one of the reasons that officer was charged, because he shot, apparently from what I've seen, indiscriminately, and that's why he was charged with, I think it was wanton or reckless endangerment or something of that nature.
And yet no one was charged with her death, with Breonna Taylor's death.
Well, because of the state of the law, I think, in Kentucky and other places, the self-defense, her boyfriend reportedly shot, and the sergeant that made the entry was struck by gunfire, and then he and the other officer returned fire. And then that other officer, my understanding, I could be wrong, was he didn't even have, he didn't even know what he was shooting at. He just started shooting and started shooting randomly instead of actually knowing who he was shooting at. And so I think that because of the state of the law in Kentucky and other places, because it was self-defense, that's why they didn't get charged. So and it was resolved within civil court. Having said that, we've got to do better in terms of thinking how when we serve warrants, under what circumstances we serve warrants, because we lost a young lady that was not armed and shouldn't been killed.
Chief, another question for you. Here we are. I want to move to George Floyd. Here we are 4 months later after his death. We know the Black Lives Matter movement has grown so much. There's been protests here in Houston and all across the country. What has changed with HPD here 4 months after the death of George Floyd?
Well, I think that what's changed is that the attention of policing and what happened to George Floyd has led to an awakening across our city and our country. Ashton and Black Lives Matter, you didn't see that many white faces talking about Black Lives Matter since then. What's happened here in Houston is that our mayor has actually codified through executive order a lot of our policies so they can't be changed. We strengthened our policies as it relates to actually talking about and prohibiting the use of net control and carotid control holds and choke holds in our city. We strengthen our policy as it relates to our expectations of officers. And by the way, I'm still looking at, after the Nicholas Chavez incident, looking at our use of force policy, and I'm looking at how we can strengthen that. We need to make sure we have a mindset that we use deadly force when we absolutely have to, and not just because we can. And so I'm looking forward to seeing the recommendations of the panel. If Ashton will talk to me every once in a while, I really want to engage him and other activists, and he does, believe it or not. We actually do talk every once in a while to see from a community standpoint what are the other things that we need to do. But I think you're going to see more changes in the upcoming weeks and months as we move forward in the city and this department.
Well, I'm going to let you and Ashton talk to each other in just a moment, but first I want to bring in our city councilwoman here, Carolyn Evans-Shabazz, and we appreciate your being here as well. Councilwoman, you have talked about some recommendations for police reform here in Houston. I know that you penned a letter with some other council members asking for specific reforms. Talk about that a little bit, if you would.
Thank you, Melanie and Chauncy, and so very glad to be here. Very sad for the occasion, but I and 4 other African-American council members, and I have to be very forthcoming regarding who they are. That's Vice Mayor Pro Tem Castex Tatum, Council Member Davis, Council Member Pollard, and Council Member Thomas. We collaborated, and actually we had engaged prior to George Floyd, and we actually had a visit with the police at the police station where we were able to talk about some things. So when George Floyd happened, we certainly knew that we needed to move forward. And so we sent the mayor a letter asking for him to do the executive order regarding what they call the 8 can't wait. And he did do that. And so we were very glad that he did that, but we are certainly aware that there were other things that were needed. And here recently, we did give 25 suggestions, which we did disseminate through the community to let them know that there are other things that need to be done to get where we need to go. And
well, and I don't want to get all 25, but give me give me a couple of things that you're very concerned about that you want to see happen.
Well, we talked about the independent review board and how we felt like they needed to use the independent review board, and some people have asked for subpoena power, but I want to be clear about something. I come from an activist background with the NAACP, so certainly I've heard a great deal about using subpoena power. So that was actually my piece of this collaboration, for me to look and investigate. And I found that without legislative movement or legislative action, you cannot have subpoena power. And I actually went I had a conversation with State Representative Ron Reynolds, who said that he and the Senator Boris Miles had attempted to move forward with that, and they are willing to support it. But because we knew that you couldn't engage subpoena power and we wanted immediate action, we asked for investigatory authority, which basically gives that board the same power, but in a more expeditious manner. And so I just want to be clear that people were saying that that was not a part of it, and we really, really needed that. And they are absolutely correct. But more importantly, we want to give the power and authority to do that which is needed in the most expeditious manner. And so that was one of the things that we were very adamant about. And coincidentally, I actually read an op-ed that Ashton P. Woods wrote regarding the 180-day rule and the 48-hour rule. And I thought that that was very important to include as well. And so those are some of the things. We do need to make it clear that these are suggestions. We know that the mayor has a task force that is due to give out their recommendations, but these are somewhat food for thought that we can have a starting point so we can get this done, because it certainly has to move past conversation. And so that's what we tried to implement in our letter.
Chauncy?
Gotcha. Thank you, Councilwoman. Now, an analysis conducted by ABC News and our 13 Investigates team, this is what we found. In several major U.S. cities, Black drivers are significantly more likely to be stopped by police than white drivers. In only 2 of the 12 cities examined by ABC News, Louisville and right here in Houston, Black Americans are likely as white Americans to be stopped by the police. But here's where the breakdown is. Our analysis found that Houston police search far more Black drivers. And we're talking about, when we're looking at these numbers, we're talking about 3 times more than white drivers. I want to go back to the chief on this. Why is this? And what do you tell people who find this very concerning?
Chief, I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry about that. I muted. I'm sorry. I think that is data that we need to look at. And the question is the disproportionality as a result of officers asking for consent searches and going on fishing expeditions, or is it a result of incident to arrest? So what we've done is we actually brought in Dr. Phil Goff from the Center for Policing Equity. And Dr. Goff has been provided all of our data, all of our search data, arrest data, citation data, and our commitment, including to the young men that you're mentoring, Chauncy Glover, that are phenomenal, is that we are going to come back and report. He's going to report out that data. He's going to give us the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then we're going to look to see what we need to do, not just from a policing standpoint, but also from a societal standpoint to address the disproportionality. So I think that we can't really speak to it until we get that third-party review. And I'm looking forward in the next few months to get that report back so we can address it with the community, and we can address it holistically across different specters of our community.
But Chief, until then, what do you want to tell Black drivers on the streets of Houston who say, hey, we're being pulled over, but we're also being searched more and we're afraid, we don't know what to do? Until that research comes back and the study comes back, what do you tell those drivers here in Houston tonight?
If you're being stopped and you're being searched and you're being treated differently without probable cause or without reason, or you think you're being profiled, you have to let us know. At the end of the day, the biggest force multiplier for this police department, any police department, is the community itself. And it's important for people to let us know. If you feel like you were intimidated into signing a consent form, or you believe you were threatened or treated inappropriately, please let us know. Folks need to also know that one of the things that, thanks to the body-worn camera investment that our city made, that we're actually auditing a lot of our arrests, a lot of our searches, a lot of our traffic stops, and we're actually actively looking for misconduct and identifying misconduct. But you can't audit every single contact, so that's why it's important for the community to let us know if we're not doing the right thing out there.
Chief, you mentioned a moment ago about the Harding Street raid and what happened to the officers in that case. But earlier this month, you fired 4 officers after you saw video of them shooting and killing Nicholas Chavez, who reportedly suffered from some kind of mental problems. I want to know if why you took that action, if that's sort of a new policy. And along the same lines, because it did have to do with video, we asked you the last time you were here for a town hall about whether or not you would change your policy and release body cam video in every case, because obviously it made such a difference in the case of Mr. Chavez.
Yeah, we are working on, first we weren't going to, the family did not want me to release video. Some families don't want you to, some families want you to. What we are working on, you saw the way that we released that video the other day with the narrative showing folks what happened. We're doing that with all the fatal shootings that occurred this year, and we're going to start rolling them out one at a time. And I'm looking to see what the mayor's group recommendation is going to be. But I think moving forward, you're going to see that as soon as we're done with our investigation, at a minimum, that'll be the time frame, or it may be sooner. I'm waiting to see what Mayor Turner's committee and ultimately the folks of this community want in terms of that discussion. The other thing that we're looking at is with this legislative session coming up is looking at what's going to be the state policies. I think there's so much pressure right now across the country that we need consistency in this country, at least in the state, and we can't do it nationwide. So you're going to see us come out with a policy as soon as we get the recommendations from the mayor's task force moving forward.
But you're still going to wait until after the mayor's task force recommendations come out.
Yeah, I think it would be, I think when you have the mayor and then you have the council's recommendations, it would be premature for me to say something today and 3 weeks from now or a month from now, we have to change it. But the ones that, all the fatal shootings, the 8 fatal shootings we've had, we're rolling them out in the same manner that you saw about 2 weeks ago with the Chavez shooting. And that will be forthcoming very quickly. We're putting them together. Part of the problem is you have to audit. You have to edit out certain information that's required, and it's very labor intensive to do that process. One of the things that we need is that we actually need industry to come up with automated systems that can actually help us process these videos in a much more rapid manner as it relates to actually taking out the information that has to be redacted to automate the redaction process, because that incident involving Mr. Chavez had many, many hours of video that had to be painstakingly reviewed. And quite frankly, we had to redact the information that's required by law. So that's part of the conversations going on, but there will be a policy forthcoming here very, very soon.
Ashton, I see you scratching your head on this one, and we've talked about this in HPD's policy. As the leader of Black Lives Matter, you think this policy needs to be changed?
Well, here's the deal. Every year that the Texas legislature goes into session, I am there with other activists. I'll never forget when the Sandra Bland Act was being worked on, and I brought in Geneva Reed Veal, Sandra Bland's mother, to the Texas legislature to get the Sandra Bland Act passed, which is now law. And I didn't see not one council member, not one school board member, not one trustee from any other board, surrounded by people who were calling us all kinds of names. So when we talk about getting things done, it's a two-pronged approach. The first thing is that we have to get at the legislature at every chance we get. All of our city council members in a horseshoe right now, including the mayor as a former state representative, needs to be lobbying the Texas legislature right now because they're filing their bills as we speak. And those bills need to be concerning the police union contracts, because there's a wrinkle in the state law that prevents us from doing a lot when it comes to police union contracts and pay parity. But also, it also stops us from how much we can regulate community advisory boards. The issue that I have and why I've been scratching my head is that the mayor keeps appointing a task force for everything under the sun. All of the recommendations that this task force is going to make is coming from the work that we've done over the last 5 years. And that is my individual frustration, along with other folks' frustration. We put out a platform called Justice Can't Wait with the ACLU of Texas and several other social justice organizations that literally produces or mocks up 3 to 5 ordinances that could literally get passed today and solve many of our problems. While I appreciate Councilmember Shabazz's support of my op-ed and general the idea that I've worked with her in the past and I know her well, I really have to push back in that in these recommendations that these 5 Black council members came out with, they didn't talk to no activists, and if they did, it probably were the ones in suit and tie and pointing shiny shoes. So if you want to talk to activists in the t-shirt and jeans with the GED who gets bills passed in the Texas legislature, let me know. Second of all, what we really need right now is to look at what we're talking about. I feel like Mel Turner has been pacifying us. This order, this executive order, is something that's already been policy. We have to transition policy into city ordinances, right? And we have to make sure those ordinances are enforceable and well-funded. We don't need situations like what happened to the firefighters where they got something on the ballot, which is something that we are considering doing if city council doesn't move, to make sure that we have enforcement and funding mechanisms in place so that they can't do what happened to the firefighters who lost their raises. The reality is this: if we don't fix these issues, especially with the no-knock raids, we're talking about George Floyd. George Floyd, one of the reasons he left is because he was harassed by Gerald Goings and had to go to Minneapolis. Had there not been a crooked HPD there, maybe Gerald Floyd would be alive right now and still a Houstonian. But there are so many people who have to leave the state of Texas for various reasons because we can't get work after we've been incarcerated. Even if we serve our time and pay our debt to society, we're still treated as pariahs, not just Black men, but Black women. And when we talk about grand jury issues, we're talking about Kamak. We have to look at this from every level. The reason why Breonna Taylor didn't get justice is because we were in a system that was built for white people by white people that was never meant to benefit Black folk. And these prosecutors tell these grand juries what to look for. And that's because up until about maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we never really saw police officers get indicted in Harris County until they started actually presenting evidence germane to the issue of why people are outraged, why they're protesting, and why they're demanding justice.
I do want to ask, Chauncy, did you have a follow-up?
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay, but I wanted to ask you, Ashton, I looked up a Pew Research study that they did just recently, and it showed that 67% of adults in the US showed some sort of support for the Black Lives Matter movement after George Floyd was killed back in June. And again, this was in June at the kind of height of all of the protests and the like. That dropped to 55% by September, by this month. And those who say they strongly support Black Lives Matter dropped from 38% to 29%. So I've got to ask you, what do you think is going on? Why do you feel as though your message with Black Lives Matter isn't getting out the way you want it to? And in particular now, we got a lot of questions about this when we asked for people to submit questions. You have the perception, Black Lives Matter does, of being involved with violent protests. So respond to me if you would, and just sort of tell me why you think Black Lives Matter has such a bad reputation, if you want to call it that, among so many people out there.
Well, the reputation of Black Lives Matter does not matter to me when it's coming from people who a majority don't look like me. The whole premise of Black Lives Matter, Houston in particular, has been to teach Black people that Black Lives Matter. That's by responding to disasters like Hurricane Harvey and helping people to rebuild their houses, by feeding homeless people, by getting laws passed and actually signed by governors into, and here's the deal. It was never about polling numbers. I'm not running for office. Activists are not running for office. We are about the survival and increasing the quality of life and life chances for people who look like us, because we always get the raw end of the deal. People feel a way because when it's white kids who win a hockey game and destroy an entire downtown, go wild, they're just happy they won a game. But if a gas station gets burned down, Chief Acevedo, mute your microphone, please. It's because when we get infiltrated, a lot of the issues and damage that happened in Houston, for example, it was white people who were coming in from different parts of the city, infiltrating and trying to instigate things. There's mountains of evidence of this, right? It does not absolve the fact that there are people who look like me that might have been instigating. We'll address that at some point. But the reality is this: when we get out there in March, we're all automatically treated as we're criminal and like we're going to be violent, because that's how America views us. So to the people who feel like they can't support us, they never wanted to support us, and I have no need to talk to them, because it's never been about getting their approval or their need to acknowledge my Blackness as a human being in this country. It's always been about saying, I don't need your permission to say that Black Lives Matter. What I need to do is for you to get out of my way so I can work with my community. Because the more those people come into the way and the more they try to direct our narrative with respectability politics, how we speak, how we act, how we dress, that's going to be where the problems are coming in. The people who are in control right now are the problem, not us.
But Ashton, did you feel as though, at least for a moment there, you did have a much more mainstream support, including a lot of whites who were walking around with Black Lives Matter signs on? You didn't feel as though that was ever the case?
Because the white people who were walking around with us, to be honest with you, people act like we disappeared for X amount of time. We've worked in every election, locally and nationally, as a collective and as our separate chapters to get things done. You will find our work everywhere. What people forgot was, oh my God, how are those white people standing in front of the Black people when the police are shooting off fire cannons and batons, right? Well, all that time we've been training. All that time we've been teaching about civil disobedience and anti-racism. All that time we've been teaching about how to support immigrants. Who do you think it was that organized the Super Bowl protest when Trump was detaining people at the airport? That was us. Okay, so when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we talk about the Black undocumented refugee immigrant. We talk about the Black woman. We talk about Black trans folks, Black LGBT people like myself in general. We are a diaspora. And our work isn't just for the cameras and for people's opinions. It's about making sure our community has what we need. And if we have to be the bad guy, and if we have to be unpopular, I will be that.
Gotcha. Ashton, I've got two questions for you. One is we're going to take a question from a viewer. This is 48-year-old Gordon from Baytown. He's a chemical plant operator. His question is, how come Black Lives Matter doesn't respond to the Black on Black crimes if Black lives really matter? That's his question to you.
I'm a student of sociology. Yeah, the kid with the GED went to college and graduated. So here's the deal. As a sociologist, that is not a real term. That is not even a scientific term. It's called intra-racial crime. And if you look at the data and the statistic that exists right now, even from 2016 to 2020, white people are technically more violent than Black people. Black on Black crime does not exist. That is a racist trope. While there is violence within our community that needs to be addressed, it doesn't take away from the fact that we have to talk about the racism that exists and what promotes that. That is all a tool of white supremacy. And that's my response to you, sir.
Got you. And another question, like, what do you say to those people who are Black and feel like that the Black Lives Matter movement Houston here can be better? They feel like there's no structure. In other major cities, Black Lives Matter groups are doing way more, they feel. And they want to know, what are you doing here in Houston? What is Black Lives Matter here, Houston, doing to address relationships between Blacks and police, especially since the death of George Floyd here in these past 4 months? Ashton.
Well, whoever asked that question just came to the scene, because I mentioned all of our work in the last 10, 15 minutes. We have been working nationally, statewide, countywide, and citywide. The issue is that people want us to look like the NAACP. And while I respect the NAACP, I don't have time for 3 meetings to approve a meeting, to get to a meeting and get nothing done. So when we respond to things, we plan our work as far as reactionary work. Like, for example, when we need to have a protest. But the reality is, if you ask around, you will see our fingerprints on everything. It's not about the relationship between Houston policing and the Black community. It's not our responsibility to get the police to do the right thing. What our responsibility is to hold them accountable for not doing the right thing, if that makes sense to you. People write the laws. You got a council member right on here. You got the police chief right there. I think the question would be better directed with, why do they act like we have to come to them when we are demanding change, when they're our elected representatives and our elected employees? They ran to represent us and to bend to the will of the people. Now, that's not always a good thing. That's not always a bad thing. The reality is this. We are doing the work that needs to get done. And what that looks like is making sure that homeless people are being fed, that they have PPE and masks. We've been passing out PPE. We went as far as to force conversations on stopping evictions, a moratorium which our mayor still will not do because the federal moratorium isn't working. We've been making sure people have been housed. We've done a lot of things. The reality is why should we have to show you our hand in the work that we're doing? Because as you know, when people like us start doing things like that, there are always folks who get in the way. There's always a formality. So I like what we're doing with Black Lives Matter Houston. And it's not just me. You might see me a lot, but there are people who are just as viable and who are just as talented as I am doing the work. That's Candace Weber, that's Brandon Mack, that's Deanna Adams, that's Malone. All of these people work in education and in healthcare. And whether you know it or not, every time we've had a disaster, that was Candace Weber, for example, at Harvey at George R. Brown doing Harvey, volunteering to be a nurse while taking that time and then helping to rebuild people's houses. We have work that we have been doing. The reality is if you're not talking to us and we're putting information out there and you're not responding to it, what am I supposed to do with that? So I encourage you to contact me at ashtonpwoods@gmail.com or blmhou@gmail.com. If you see that we're not doing something, maybe we need to connect you to the fact that we might just be doing it. And if we aren't, we can work with you on how to do it. But this is an all of the above strategy, and it requires everybody's attention and action, not just Black Lives Matter Houston.
All right, well, since you have brought that up, I want to turn back to Councilmember Shabazz to ask her about that. I mean, do you feel as though you're able to work with Black Lives Matter and that they are doing some important laying of the foundation for you?
Certainly, I appreciate that, but I also have to push back on the pushback in regards to saying that we did not engage with activists. I know that I did personally, and it's very dangerous to make an assumption. I'm sure, I certainly cannot assume that my colleagues did not reach out to activists as well. And so I'm pushing back on that piece. But certainly people came to the meeting, the public safety meeting, they gave recommendations. Those were included in our suggestions. So we are listening. And also I wanted to say that in regards to the police camera footage, we did ask that a clear policy be instituted that clearly establishes guidelines and procedures for the release and access of the dash cams and the body worn cams. And so I wanted to add that in. And so I just want to say that we do listen. Now, in terms of Black Lives Matter, I believe that at the very beginning, my very first statement was that I read an op-ed by Ashton P. Woods. If I was not willing to give him credit and credibility regarding this process of the 180-day and the 48-hour rule, then that would clearly state that I'm discounting him and his value and the value of his organization, when I clearly value his organization. And so I can't speak to how any organization gets things done. I do know that I am a member of the NAACP, and there is some criticism and certainly some that I may have from time to time. But I do know that when it is expedient, in most cases, they will make a decision and come out with a public statement and not have to go from the committee to the committee. Now, we do use the committee structure in a lot of instances. But in answer to your question, I would be very, very glad to work with not only Black Lives Matter, but any organization that wants to come and make some substantive change so that we can actually move forward and we all leave these situations alive.
Chauncy, did you want to jump in?
So yes, I want to go back to the chief. Chief, we did a similar town hall a few months ago, and you talked really heavy on transparency and promising transparency to Houstonians. We know in the wake of Breonna Taylor's shooting, a group of Houston pastors and activists now calling for a major change to the Houston Police Department Civilian Review Board. Councilwoman Shabazz, you also touched on this a little bit, but this group, they want the power to subpoena documents and administrative letters, interview witnesses, complainants, suspects, and even the officers involved in the shooting or the situation. And when you talk about transparency, Chief, would you support this? Would you support this a civilian review board having more power?
Well, I came from Austin, where we had a civilian review panel. I'm not opposed to it, but I think Ashton nailed it on the head that a lot of that has to go has to go to the legislature, or it has to be by contract. And I don't see the union actually giving that up and having a civilian review panel with, being able to interview officers and all that stuff. I'm a realist. I think it's going to have to go to the legislature, or you're going to have to buy it, actually, in terms of trying to negotiate it with the union. I'm not opposed to it. I mean, look, I think that if you talk to union leaders here in Austin, they're going to tell you that by and large, I hold people accountable, and they apply complaint about it. You don't get votes of no confidence from unions from taking it easy on malfeasance. So I'm not opposed to it, but I think it's going to require legislation at the state level, or ultimately it's going to require contract negotiations with the union.
And Chief, you talked about that transparency that you want, and then I heard Ashton talk about how they want to hold HPD accountable when something happens. I want to know about you all's communication. Chief Art Acevedo, Ashton, are you all talking? How many meetings have been had between you two since the George Floyd incident?
I'll let
Absolutely
Ashton
none. Absolutely none. And I don't necessarily put anybody's fault at that, but what I know is around the time Acevedo came in, there would be quarterly meetings every year with the different activists, whether we were at odds or not, and we sat at the table and we had discussions. Those discussions have not happened for a couple of years, at least where I was in the room. I don't know if that's an oversight, but I'm realistic about how the mechanics of office spaces work. Sometimes people drop the ball, but the reality is no, I have not been in communication with him. Regardless of that, from time to time, I will get a text message from them, and I'll respond, if there's something that has to happen, a meeting that has to happen so that we can get a policy change. I'm all game for that, because at the end of the day, the work is about making sure people are safer, period. And, while I'm on the end of abolishing the police, yes, I say that I would, if it were up to me, our Acevedo would not be a police chief, and the Houston Police Department wouldn't exist, and there would be a different way of how we handle crimes of violence and different things like that. But in the current world that we live in, I know that I have to make strange bedfellows. So from time to time, if I get a call, I'll answer. I might be apprehensive, but I know the work has to get done. But in general, we don't keep regular communication.
So you're one of those who believes in defunding the police. Is that what I hear you saying, Ashton?
Well, there's a difference between defunding and abolishment. I'm for both.
You get rid of them altogether.
So yeah, I'm on the defunding end because I know I can't abolish the police right now in reality. So defunding doesn't mean for those who have to, oh my God, what's going to happen is something, da, 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 da. The reality is if you have to ask about your safety, you are already safe and living in a bubble of privilege. Second of all, the reality is that what we're talking about is taking money from police militarization, like the almost $200,000 they got for new Kevlar and protective gear about a few weeks ago, and shift that money towards addressing food deserts, addressing access to healthcare, and addressing different issues that people might be facing, like homelessness. I really believe that money could be spent on several centers that contain showers and lockers for homeless people, because the biggest issue that we face with helping homeless folks has really actually been about the fact that they don't have an address. If you give someone an address, they can be open to an array of services, whether it's expanded to mental health care or to just in general access to like Social Security. And I think that's what that money could be best spent on, not policing itself. Our crime has actually gone down. And if we talk about the rising crime rates of victimless crimes, nonviolent crimes, we have to acknowledge that we are in the middle of a pandemic and we work in a service city. And I know very well about that. Being a Katrina survivor, born and raised in New Orleans, most of the jobs there were at hotels and hospitality. And while we have great industries here, oil and gas, a lot of the people working in the high-end industries get carted in from other places. They don't hire the people from Houston. They don't pull from the fabric of the people that make Houston Houston, which is why we're working low-wage jobs that don't come with healthcare coverage, and we're riding buses on a metro system that's been reimagined that's not doing well. So right. I think that's what we need.
I'm going to break in here because I want to let the chief respond, and then we'd like to talk to Herbert and to Jonathan. So Chief, your response to the idea of defunding your department?
Well, look, let's be clear. If you talk to people that sadly need the police the most, it's communities of color. That is a fact. And when I talk to a lot of members of the community, they don't want less police. They don't want the police to fund them. They want better policing. They want professional policing. And they want policing that are helping that community be safe. I've said, and I'll say it again, that it is a false equivalence to say that we have to give up good policing in communities of color and in poor communities to address the disproportionality in terms of lack of economic opportunity, educational opportunity, mental health, public health, housing. You know, when COVID impacted the entire nation, including corporate America and big business, the Congress printed $3 trillion overnight. And so they can do that overnight for COVID. There's no reason why we can't invest in both. I do believe, though, that the day that we make the investments, the proper investments across our societal spectrum, that we will reap the benefits, and you'll be able to see the need for law enforcement and crime positively impacted, and you will be able to reduce it. But I don't think, I think that River Oaks doesn't matter if you defund the police, because they're already paying for River Oaks patrol, and they're paying for a constable patrol. But communities of color and poor communities can't pay for that, and so I think it's about a proper policing. Let me just say one other thing with Ashton. I do look forward to continue to work with Black Lives Matter with Ashton, and we haven't. I think a big part of what's happened is every time you have an intention to do something, something comes up. We can't make excuses. We need to engage, and we need to get together to come up with some plans on what we need to work on that can be done and actionable with this legislative session. Because if we don't see some change, I don't think that the streets are going to get quiet in this country. This is a watershed moment, and we've got to seize it, but we're not going to see the outcomes that we want in terms of public safety and reconciliation in our nation.
And Chief, I got to push on this a little more, because I think our viewers may say, hey, 4 months after George Floyd's death, I'm a little disappointed that the leader of the Black Lives Matter Houston and our police chief haven't talked. You're talking about a text message over 4 months, and that's been all the communication. And I know, Ashton, you say you're feeding the homeless and working with PPE and getting that out on the streets, but you have Black people who are saying, hey, I'm tired of being stopped. I'm trying to live. I need you to talk to the police chief to help us feel safer in our community. So, I mean, we can't keep coming to the table and talking. We need something, substantial here. Can we get a standing meeting between the police chief and the Black Lives Matter leader once a month or something? We have to walk away so people can know that we're not just doing these town halls and talking here, that you all are talking. And Ashton, you're fighting on the behalf of the constituents and people who are supporting the Black Lives Matter. And the chief is listening, and you all are communicating. We're talking about 4 months since George Floyd's death.
Right, exactly. And I have to tell you, I stated earlier that there were meetings, and for some reason I stopped being invited, just like with the city council members. I mean, I know it's only been 9 months since those council members got in. The reality is I have not gotten it. I mean, Carolyn sent me a text message of support, but I have not, on a professional level, beyond actually working in electoral politics and getting people out to vote and like just holding and breaking bread with people who are in leadership to make sure that the lines of communications are open. Apparently, I'm too hard to work with and too radical. And that's the reality of it all. Now, that's not me making an excuse. This is me telling you my lived experience as an activist. We work very hard, not just me, but the people I work with, not just at Black Lives Matter Houston, but across the spectrum, even with the ACLU of Texas and a bunch of other organizations out there. We have the same consensus. No one is talking to us. We found out about the letter that the council member sent to Mayor Turner over the weekend when they got out. Like, we put out a whole platform that was based on information that we have been researching for 5 years. Again, and I stated about that on the ACLU website and on blmhouston.com under criminal justice reform, the Justice Can't Wait platform. And we have not been contacted. We've constantly had to respond. They're not listening to us. And that's not necessarily a bearing on Councilmember Carolyn Evans-Shabazz, but it's a collective thing. And I am embarrassed and disappointed. The worst thing about 2020 for me as a Black activist, and the most stressful thing, is that I don't feel supported by the people who we fought tooth and nail to get into that horseshoe, and they acted no better than the previous councils before that. And so until I feel that, there's a large amount of distrust between me, the other activists, and the people in that horseshoe, especially Mel Turner, because at the end of the day, whether I have a conversation with Acevedo, the buck stops at that horseshoe because they can put things into ordinance. The mayor hires the police chief in this city. The mayor tells the police chief what to do. he answers to Mayor Turner. And the person I need to be talking to right now is Mayor Turner. But he don't want to hear nothing I have to say. And he don't want to hear from the other activists because we're not here to polish his ring or kiss his behind. So until he decides to get off of his high horse, we'll be right here ready to talk. And we
All right, Ashton, thank you. The mayor's not on, so he's not on tonight. So.
Could I say something? Could I say something?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I just want to be clear. First of all, I have a great deal of respect for Ashton, and I have told him that on several occasions. But he is certainly not the only activist in the city. And so I can't, again, make assumptions that there has been no engagement with any other leadership in the activist community. And certainly—
Your board proves that. Your commission that Mayor Turner appointed approves that. There are only 3 or 4 people who actually do work in the community.
Well, actually, to be honest with you,
y'all pick y'all friends and y'all donors.
Without giving the person's name, I actually engage with a real activist person who's been on the ground for many, many years and tried to convince him to be on the board. And so I certainly am not one who has a problem with anyone who wants to come forth and have some substantive change. But certainly you're also making an assumption that people don't want to work with you because you're too radical. That is not true. I have no problem with that. But I want to ask you, have you ever reached out to my office? Because there is no one that has reached out to my office that I have not engaged in a meeting. So do not take it that if you have not been brought to the table on this, although your op-ed was very clear and very good, by the way, and it stated clearly your position, it does not mean that no one has reached out to any other persons in the activist community, because I know personally for a fact that I did.
I was answering Chauncy's
question.
I was answering Chauncy's question.
Let's go to the chief. Let's go to the chief. Go ahead, chief.
And I have to push back a little bit. Because it's not like Ashton, it's not like we don't reach out to you. We do communicate with you. I know that Troy Finner communicates with you on a monthly basis. When you wrote that op-ed piece, I actually talked to you about that op-ed piece, and actually, like the council member, was very complimentary. But the truth is, we don't meet often enough, and COVID has really set back everybody's efforts. I don't care what anybody says. Zoom is just not the way to connect with people. Get in a room, get behind. Get in a room together, and our commitment is that we're going to do that, and you've got to commit to it too, Ashton. We'll come to you, you come to us, but we've got to come up with some things that we can work on collaboratively. If you talk to Chaz Moore at the Austin Justice Coalition, I think you know who's from Houston, and Mimi. I've worked with activists throughout my career. We've got a session coming up, and we've got to get together to come up with things that we agreed on, like the 180. I think the 180 should be from date of real discovery, not from day of. Why should we reward people, officers, for hiding misconduct? Chauncy, you talked about searches. People are being searched. We just fired an officer a couple of weeks ago because someone complained about a search. We investigated it, we took it seriously, and the officer was fired. So the more that we interact, the more we communicate, I think the better outcomes for the community and the better outcomes for the officers that we lead.
Well, I want to go ahead and shift gears a little bit because Herbert and Jonathan have been incredibly patient throughout all of this, and we do want to talk to them about their friend who they grew up with, George Floyd. And I've got to ask you, and either one of you can take this question right away. Were you surprised by the outpouring after George's death? And did you take that as a real sign of encouragement that there might be substantial change out there? Herbert, you want to tackle that? Oh, go ahead, Jonathan.
It was more surreal than anything. We knew the character and the type of guy Floyd was because we spent so much over a 35-year relationship, both Herbert and I have with him. So it was more surreal than surprising because even from his own lips, Floyd said he wanted to touch the world. But unfortunately, it was through his death that it's happening. So I'm optimistic about, the protesting that's happened. I do want to see long-term sustainability that will, keep the fire going. I think what happens a lot of times, that emotional fatigue sets in. And so, at the height of, an incident everyone's excited, they're angry, they're protesting in the streets, but then they have to go back to work, or their feet hurt, their body ache, and so they move on to something else. And so for us, our desire is to keep his legacy going, and to keep the fire going, because we feel like that it's definitely worth it. We don't want his name and his life to be summed up by what happened in 8 minutes and 46 seconds.
Herbert, do you want to also address that? Were you surprised, and did you feel as though at the time, certainly 4 months ago, that perhaps the world would change?
I was very surprised. Like Veal said, if you knew Floyd, Floyd wasn't going to harm anybody. We talk about it all the time. We can't think of any time that we've known Floyd that he had any type of confrontation with anyone. He was just this big, lovable guy, very humble, very funny guy, always joking around. So to actually see that happen to him was very surprising, very unfortunate, and it still hurts. I get kind of teary-eyed and choked up, just talking about it, because he was that guy. And we started an organization called C.H.U.M.P in honor of Floyd. So the 88, which is the football number that Floyd wore, and C.H.U.M.P acronym means Communities Helping Underprivileged Minorities Progress. And it's myself, Jonathan Veal, Vaughn Dickerson, and Gerald Moore. And we were sitting around the other day, and I just thought about it. Floyd was our starting tight end. So I was the starting quarterback. Jonathan Veal was my starting receiver. Vaughn Dickerson was my starting other receiver, and Floyd was my starting tight end. So we all came in as freshmen, and without Floyd, with Floyd, that'll be the starting lineup right there. So it was very surprising and unfortunate, but it still hurts to this day.
I want to go back to Jonathan, and you talk about this organization that you all have created, and right there from where Floyd was from in the 3rd Ward. Have you all seen a lot of positive come out of such a bad situation involving George Floyd? I'm hearing about things in the 3rd Ward going on, like the voter registration drives. There's weekend happenings where the community rallying together. Do you see a major change just here in the 4 months right there in his neighborhood, right there in the 3rd Ward?
There's some momentum that's taking place, and as Herbert alluded to, the organization is about initiatives that will be germane to the current climate of our community. And so right now we're in a political season, and so getting individuals registered to vote, and let them know that they have to exercise their voice. And so even tomorrow, we're partnering with the Houston Texans at the Texans YMCA off of Griggs and MLK from 4 to 7 with the drive-through voters registration. But not only just getting them registered, educating them. We don't lean to the right or to the left. We just want to educate folk and have them empowered to go out and vote based on where your values and your morals lie. And so not only get them registered, get them educated, but then inspire them to actually go out to the polls and vote, exercise your voice. And then after you vote, hold those that you have voted into public positions accountable to whatever platform that they said they were going to stand on. And so, yeah, we're seeing day by day, moment by moment, momentum and support on a daily basis.
Now, Herbert, I've got to ask you, and Jonathan used an interesting word, fatigue, that in fact, sometimes people are so geared up in the beginning, but after a while, there's not the same kind of energy, the same kind of drive. What is your feeling now, 4 months later? I mean, are you still encouraged by what you see out there?
I'm definitely encouraged. When you have someone as close as Floyd was, that's not your blood family, you're going to fight to the end, knowing that what happened wasn't supposed to happen. And a lot of people, ask, what was the difference between Floyd death and Breonna Taylor or some of the other death? Well, my answer is we actually seen it happen compared to a minute clip here or a picture here where the police department has to do an investigation. So if I give you 12 pictures of a scene of an investigation and ask you to try to figure out what happened first, it's going to take you a little time. But actually seeing your colleague, your brother from another mother, your classmate, your teammate, actually get killed on TV or on a recording for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, you know, that hurt. It's no investigation to that. You know, we have an officer with his knee on my friend, my teammate neck, with his hands in his pocket, as if he was, you know, comfortable. This is okay to do. You know, so you know, we definitely are motivated. And I was telling Jonathan and them, we used to have to run 2 miles before practice in the morning and 2 miles after practice in the evening. And I just feel like that was preparing us for this time. We didn't know it back then, preparing us for this time.
All right, thank you. Here in the last few minutes, we want to give each of you all 30 seconds. I want to start with you, Jonathan, and then we'll go to Herbert. You've heard all that we've talked about tonight here in this town hall. We've heard about the case of George Floyd, your friend, and the most recent outcry from yesterday, Breonna Taylor, and what happened and what's happening there in Louisville, Kentucky. To spark some substantial change, to leave the table and actually see change happening, what do you think needs to happen? And we'll start with John.
Certainly, thank you. I think 3 things will get us on the right direction. Everyone, whether Black, white, no matter what their ethnicity is, you have to stand up. When I say stand up, you have to have some backbone. You have to have a level of awareness about what's going on in our society. Not only stand up, but then speak up. Use your voice in a powerful manner in whatever respective sphere of influence that you have, to speak up and speak out against injustices that's taking place in our societies, our communities. And then also be accountable. So don't just call others out, but look in the mirror and say, what can I do to be a part of some positive change? And then once you do that, you step up, speak up and be accountable. You can now have a platform to do the same for others, to have them stand up, speak up, and be accountable as well.
Herbert?
Yeah, so getting this invitation to this Zoom, I kind of did some research on the Black Lives Matter, and I looked at protests and progress. And what I did was I went to Google and kind of found some definitions for protest and progress. And what I found was I noticed in all the different definitions for protest, I seen public, meaning protesting in public. Then I seen the word formal. Formal to me is structure. When you formal, it's very active and it's very structured. And last but not least, and when what people have to realize is a positive protest will get us further than anything. That word positive is very fundamental to what we are doing, because you know we could go back and forth with one another, but I think we could get further if we be more positive and take the negative out of it. Let's sit down and talk about it. You know, like they were saying, you know, just because I'm not reaching out to you, that don't mean you can't reach out to me. So we have to come to a level ground and reach out to one another. And for progress moving forward towards a destination to develop, we have to develop this thing, develop a higher and better and more advanced stage, meaning we have to take it to another level. You know.
All right, Herbert, thank you so much. Ashton?
You call me Melanie?
Yeah, I did.
So I want to leave you guys. I want to first of all thank you all for having me on. It's good to see you guys. Well, I will say this: Black Lives Matter Houston, in conjunction with several other organizations, are working on changes at every level of government. Like previous years, we're working on multiple state laws. We're working with the County Commissioner's Court, which has actually passed some of the work that passed some of the policy changes that we've been asking for into law for Harris County. We're making sure that we're out there continuing to serve the people, whether it be addressing homelessness or feeding people who are just hungry, making sure that people have proper PPE like masks, gloves, and hand sanitizer. We'll also have some other things coming down the line, but if you need to get in contact with us, hit us up at blmhouston.com, or you can email us at blmhou@gmail.com. Again, thank you guys for having us on.
All right, Ashton, thank you. Councilwoman?
Thank you so very much for having me. And I want to say that we as council, we sat in the public safety meeting. We listened to 221 speakers for 8 hours. Then we composed a letter of suggestions, the 5 Black council members, to show that we were listening. I want to ask people to first and foremost realize that even while we did all that, we're still passing out PPE and trying to keep people safe in this community and trying to get people to take the census, which I have on my census shirt. And I just want people to reach out also to the governor. We talked about evictions briefly. Reach out to the governor, get some CARES Act money from the governor, because the city has put in $20 million as well as Harris County. I also want to say that I indicated that I have engaged with activists, and the activist in particular, again, I won't call his name, but I've never seen him in a 3-piece suit and the shoes are not shiny, but he works very, very hard in the community. But I want to make sure that everybody knows that we're really trying to do everything we can, because we are no longer in favor or tolerable of situations where people are innocent until proven dead.
Okay. And Chief, I want to give you the last word. And as we do that, I want to ask you specifically just about some numbers that we've seen. And the question was, do you believe police are using too much force leading to brutality? In 2017, Black people 59% felt that way as compared to 34% of whites. In 2020, 92% of Black people felt that way as compared to 52% of whites. So as we wrap this up, tell me what you think is going to change that perception and what you'd like to see happen now.
Well, I think first and foremost, I want to say thank you for having me on. And I want to extend my condolences to Jonathan for the loss of his teammate. As a result of George Floyd's death and murder, we saw a lot of marching going on across the country and a lot of activism. And I personally made a promise to a lot of young people on the streets, and that's that we are going to affect change. We're going to need the legislature's help. We're going to need the congressional help, and ultimately we'll need all Americans to weigh in. And I can tell you that until we see and address the issues, not just with policing, but the disproportionality in terms of opportunities across the societal landscape, I think the Black community will always feel that they're a lesser valued member of this country. And so it starts with the police because we're the most visible cog, but we need a lot of work ahead of us that involves a lot of other entities, including the criminal justice system, the educational system. And let's face it, as much as we talk about diversity and opportunity, I would like to say that law enforcement, as much work that we have ahead of us, in a lot of ways, we're well ahead of corporate America and the top 500 companies, and I can just go down the line. So the work's not going to end, but neither is the commitment. And I look forward to continuing this conversation, actually having some meaningful dialogue with BLM Houston and others as we prepare for the legislative session.
And I'm going to check in with you, Chief, and Ashton, to see if you all are communicating and talking and see if we can get that standing meeting. Thank you all to our great panelists. Thank you all so much for being here with us tonight. We really appreciate it. And also all of our viewers on ABC13.com and other platforms. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. And Mel, thank you so much for being here. I'll let you close us out.
Oh, no, I think you did a great job. Everybody, thank you for being with us. And we want to thank everyone out there who watched us tonight. We hope to hear from you in the coming days about what you thought. Have a great evening, everybody.
Please take the census.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.